Thank our audience for joining us today on a weird weather Wednesday. I think we may have tornadoes in central Iowa tonight, so that's not very exciting for me here in the Midwest. But and it's 73 degrees in Iowa in December, a week before Christmas.
Yes.
That is so weird.
Hey, I'm in New York today, and it's like 65 degrees outside. So
yeah,
I'm like,
it's weird, but I think it gets to our topic of resiliency a bit, that we need to be able to move as the world around us changes these days. We have a lot of reasons. We can make a long list, I think. So let me just start off saying a little bit about one of the latest buzzwords in the boardroom, which is resilience. Organizations need to anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to adverse conditions. In cybersecurity, this includes increasingly destructive cyber attacks from nation states, criminal gangs, and disgruntled individuals. It's important to understand the advanced tactics, techniques, and procedures of the adversary and to prepare and practice to respond and recover with plans and playbooks and executive buy-in. Cyber resiliency also means maturing your processes and capabilities so you better understand the posture of your systems, where the important data resides, and what is business critical so you can prioritize your response when something bad does happen. It means being able to respond to business changes, new technologies, and changes to the regulatory landscape. The cybersecurity function is more responsive and a better business enabler by becoming more resilient. All right, so I'm John Johnson. I've been in the industry doing different things for companies for 25 years. Been at a few Fortune 500s. I've been an adjunct professor, and I've been in education and government and consulting, and startups. So I will cede to the panelists and let them introduce themselves. Let me just start off here with Brian Hurd. Go alphabetically. Please introduce yourself and add anything I may have overlooked in my definition of cyber resilience.
Will do, and thank you for allowing me to be part of such a great panel. It's great to see everybody, Carolyn, Richard, and John, of course, yourself. I've been in the community about 30 years, back when John and I both had hair that was its original color. For those of you younger kids in the audience, the web didn't exist when we started doing these things. So I've had a very fortunate career. I started off U.S. Naval Academy and founded the program for cyber counterespionage for the U.S. Navy at NCIS, which a lot of you know is a TV show. A couple of quick hits. We weren't that cute, obviously. We weren't that thin, absolutely, obviously. And we can't solve crime in 42 minutes when you take all the commercials out. So I worked there and then around the world in counterespionage, counterterrorism, and ultimately was Microsoft's first chief of cybercrime for the corporation and the digital crimes unit. I now work with Aon, a global insurance company that bought Strauss Freeburg. Many of you may know us as well. In resilience, I spend more time in boardrooms this year and last year than I have in the rest of my career combined, talking to senior leadership teams and boards about resilience before or often during a cyber crisis. And it is. And John, ransomware is all the rage with the Log4j out too. But we've had these supply chain attacks. It's resilience, not only of your company of an attack, but your company of being a supply chain problem for others. I've seen amazing things in executives this year, and I look forward to talking about them on the panel, that are about emotional resilience more than sometimes technical. I'll hand it over to Carolyn, whose career is actually more impressive than mine. So.
Greetings. I am super excited to be here with this group. I started my career in information security a mere 16 years ago, leading information security teams at eBay and Zynga. These were super cool places to be working in information security and risk management. In both cases, we were running online operations 24/7 with millions of simultaneous users daily. I've worked in product. I currently work at a startup. I've worked in consulting. I host a podcast called Humans of InfoSec. I am absolutely obsessed with the people in this industry and their stories. What else? I work for Cobalt now. We're a pen test as a service company, pen testing plus SaaS, and really, I come to the table with a very optimistic perspective, which might be a little unusual in our industry sometimes. I think that resiliency has a lot to do with, at the same time, learning from history while paying really, really good attention to exactly what's happening in the present. And I think that a lot of preparing for the present means we don't necessarily know what's going to happen, but we can do things that we know are going to help us. We can make sure we have effective communication with the right folks, as an example. So I'm super excited to be talking about resiliency and adaptability today with this group.
Great. Richard?
Sure. Lifelong person in cybersecurity on that side of it. I won't do the years because I'll embarrass myself, because it's probably close to Carolyn plus John on that side of it. I've been doing this.
Cybersecurity was my second career, Richard.
Okay. On that side, so I've been in the industry a really long time. I've worked for global multinationals as well as being founder for several startups. So I've sat on both sides of the equation. And I think resiliency is one of the first times. The first time I remember cyber resiliency being mentioned was a paper that came out from the World Economic Forum back in the late 2000s that was talking about resiliency and how this was something that was going to be in that. But I think we take the classic model, and we always use that CIA triad for a long time of confidentiality, integrity, and availability as being kind of what actually put the footprint on. But technology changes. It doesn't sit still. It always moves, and moves very, very fast. And I think it's actually added some stuff to it. And in that, which one of those issues is privacy. That is just as important now as it ever was. But now it's part of that triad that's there, which now makes it a square. And we can continue on with that with safety, because human factors and safety is around the cybersecurity. Hey, if I disable door locks or other things, I can definitely impact organizations and their ability to respond on that side of it that's there. And I think it's the same thing of going through that is the reliability. We've seen things like whole cloud services go offline, which impacts you. Even if you're not in that, it could be a third party or somebody else that's available into that. We've now integrated all these systems together. And if one cog of that complex machine goes down, it messes everything up across the board. And we've seen that time and time again, whether it's an incident, new 0-day vulnerability, or something else that everybody's scrambling around. We're in the middle of this. And I think that resiliency now comes into it from a design aspect and just a boardroom conversation, as well as the operations conversations of that. It may not be anything that you're doing that all of a sudden becomes your fault, to the point of, we remember from last week when Amazon came out and said, we had some anomalies going on, and that took down the whole presence of that. And you're like, well, can you describe the anomalies or what was going on? And those are things that are like unexpected consequences occur. And I think that's one of the key areas around resiliency is the unexpected now has to be expected all the time, because it does happen.
All right. I see that I've got two questions that are real similar here, so I'm gonna merge them together, and I'm gonna start with you, Richard, since you were the last contestant. So, what is the biggest opportunities, challenges, drivers for building resilience in your cybersecurity program?
No, I didn't know I was on a
Any
game
any
show.
of those you can
Can
choose.
I get
however you want to
resiliency for
answer.
500, John? No, I think you have to think of it from that. You have to go with the unexpected items to build into the resiliency program, not just, hey, and we go back to the other school. Oh, it's a DDoS attack, it's a fiber outage, it's DNS. Anytime something goes down, the rumor mill starts, and it's either DNS, fiber outage, or something, or DDoS kind of things. But I think you have to build that into it from a design perspective. What happens if this happens? What happens if Amazon does go down, Google goes down, Azure, Microsoft services go down, Office 365 goes down? Because I think we build some things that if you didn't go according to plan, if my mail system got taken out or my VoIP system got taken out in my organization, how am I going to contact people? And you're like, well, we look them up in that directory that's online. We no longer print phone books. We may have call sheets. We may have printed them out, but they're at the office. They're not at my house. And so you really have to build a lot of things from a design perspective of worst case scenarios, but even to the point of just how are you going to do it, but also the length of things. If you actually have to get on a plane today somewhere, because that's part of your resiliency plan, that can be really, really hard. Okay, go to the airport. Well, no, first I got to go get a COVID test and things around that. Oh, now I have to self-quarantine for 14 days. That's not really benefiting anybody if I'm in country and I can't do anything at that point in time. I don't have boots on the ground or anything else that's going to be helpful. So you really have to take a look at it from not only the design perspective, but how you actually respond in the COVID world and things like that. How are you going to respond? How are your third parties going to respond to this at the same levels of that? And if you don't put those things in, you're now at that boardroom conversation. Well, when will we know more? Because the clock starts, and 45 minutes later, there is a phone call that you need to answer that somebody's asking what's going on and how do we know about it? And I need to be able to get some suggestions that we're looking into it. That doesn't bode well for my long-term survivability at an organization.
So, Brian, you're at Stroh's Freeburg, and you work with lots of clients. Some of them have had a very bad day, and they're avoiding too much bad press. Yeah. What are you seeing as the concerns that organizations have about resiliency? Why are they striving for resiliency?
So, and without any, with humor but respect for those going through it, some of my clients are having a bad day today. I started 3 new ransomwares within the last 24 hours that are brand new, helping those companies through their ransomware attack, negotiating with the vendor, with the not only the vendors, but also the adversary for ransoms of $5, $10 or more million. So the resiliency, when I talk about these things, it's with an unfortunate recency bias. What I'm seeing in the boards is cyber used to be an issue that was academically talked about because of all these events, and Richard and everybody on this panel, and many of you in the audience, screaming gospel at the sky for many decades about cyber being at the board level. Now they're faced with the undeniable truth that the minute you get to one of these, the theft of intellectual property at the core heart of the products that you've all created, or a bad lever, or commingling of source code from a bad arriver putting and poisoning your well, or ransomware, invoice scams, etc. It immediately becomes a board issue, at a senior leadership team / board issue. And I think gone are the days when non-cyber people can say, well, it's not my problem. The CFO is the one that has to make the call about the $10 million. And whether their chief risk officer has insurance to cover it, or what the sublimits are and things like that. Those all have to happen in that boiler room. And as you recommended at the top of the discussion, yes, having real tabletops, not the crap ones, the real ones, with real cyber smoke jumpers, not academics, And God bless their hearts, the FBI goes around, does stuff. They don't even know what happens in the rooms because the lawyer is usually has us there under privilege. The resilience, and I'll go back to Carolyn. I think you raised a very amazing point. I'd like to reflect it. Many of the times when I'm talking to these CEOs or titans of industry, I'm not talking to them about the question about whether you can recover from your backups is pretty much answered in the first hour of the discussion. It's what are you going to tell your customers when the lawyer says don't say anything? How are you in that Johnson & Johnson moment with the poisoning of Tylenol scam back in the day? How are you going to maintain trust of your employees, of your stakeholders, of your stockholders and your partners while you try and navigate and sometimes go against the advice of your attorneys, of your insurance companies to share information to maintain trust? And the resiliency and fortitude, emotional fortitude to pick a path and stick with it in this day and age is above and beyond.
Carolyn,
Back to the weather desk, John.
copy over. Caroline, you kind of got the aviator headset on there too. So, do you have anything come to mind along these lines before I?
There are so many things.
Go right ahead.
There are so many things. So I think there's two categories of unexpected things. There's unexpected things that you couldn't have predicted. I am willing to bet that out of the four of us, none of us predicted COVID-19. So there's one category. There is a second category of stuff that you can actually totally predict. Ransomware is not new. Ransomware can be prevented. If organizations know about their tech infrastructure, address their vulnerabilities, and test their backups, a lot of ransomware can actually be prevented. So I think there's two categories that we need to consider here. Stuff that you actually couldn't predict and stuff that you could totally predict and that was happening 20 years ago, and that's going to happen for the next 20 years. Ransomware being one example. Social engineering is another. For all of time, there will always be social engineering. We can predict that. The four of us will get on a panel 10 years from now, and we'll talk about the latest version of a social engineering attack. That is predictable. So in the predictable category of what is unexpected, these are the things that we have an opportunity to iterate and to reiterate. We can say, look, it's 2021. In September, we got a new version of the OWASP Top 10. If I take the 2021 version of the OWASP Top 10 and I put it next to the 2003 version, they are depressingly similar. And what does that say to me? That says to me that as an industry, we know exactly what the most common vulnerabilities are to be found in web applications. And yet, after 17 years of the best and brightest in our field, knowing and educating and building technology to find and fix and prevent these problems, they persist. Now,
if I
there
could,
is that. Yes, please,
I could
please.
throw an amen in and jump in on this thread. I have one lightning rod issue I want to throw out in support of this. Stop blaming the users. They're going to click. Like, stop trying to make users detectives of URLs. Stop blaming the user when they give their O365 creds to a phishing website that's a fake Amy Schumer concert that was set up the day before the real one. It is a bad technologist that doesn't think, hey, I can protect the endpoint even if the user is going to go all on every red light district in the internet and be tricked. We have to change that metric. Sorry, didn't mean to I'll get off my soapbox a little bit, but
I love it.
One of those issues. 20 years
Keep
later,
on
we're still
dancing.
30 years later. Oh my God, 30 years. 30 years, we're still blaming users. And there are plenty of technologies that stops this. Whether we share out slides later, the smoke detectors, the sprinkler systems, and the fire doors and radon detectors of our day are endpoint protection, multi-factor authentication, and the like. And that's what we need to talk about, because people are going to play with matches. People are going to deep fat fry a turkey in their living room. These things happen. a lot.
Yeah,
So
let me
back to
let
the
me
panel.
relate
I'll get
a-
off my soapbox.
let me relate a
I'm
quick
going with
story
the
here.
deep fried turkey moment here,
Uh,
so it's okay.
Work for an insurance company. It was just Thanksgiving. You can only imagine.
Don't take your frozen turkey and deep fry it in your living room. We had a case once at another company where this is an analog example. We have our data center and we have an automated door with a button, big exit button. Next to it is a red button, says do not push. It's in a plexiglass. It's under a plexiglass cover where you have to pull something out and open the cover and push it. And we still had a user who pushed that and released the halon in the data center. So for whatever reason.
And that's not
Go
an
ahead,
isolated
Richard.
incident, John. That's the design of data centers and the thing. There have been multiple incidents of that. And to Brian's point, it's like, just because we're trying to do not press, we gave all the warnings, people still do those things. You need to take into account.
Right.
But in defense of those people, think about every late night, weekend, missed soccer game that either the security types or the frontline troops or even system administrators, like they're tired, they're hungry. This is hour 16. Again, we need to design better systems.
Yeah, I think designing better systems, and to Caroline's point, there are things that we can predict.
And there are things we cannot predict, right? So none of the four of us predicted COVID-19. None of the four of us predicted, I mean, frankly, I don't even know if Planet Cybersec would exist the way that it does today, if not for everyone being remote. There are all these things that happen, right? But what we can do, and I heard Brian alluding to this in his introduction, is we can design the way that we work so that when stuff happens that we don't anticipate, we have the energy and we have the connections to respond quickly. There is this like totally wild idea that I was talking with Jennifer, I'm going to botch the pronunciation of her last name, Chaplewski from Target. She and I were talking the other day about this wild idea. What if we said to every individual on our security teams, only book your time 80%. I want you to intentionally and consistently keep 20% of your schedule available because you don't know what's going to come up, but we know that something that you don't expect is going to come up. And I want you to have a little bit of bandwidth. I want you to have saved a little bit of energy so that when the thing happens, that you're sharp and that you're ready and that you're not exhausted and sick and tired and, already just downtrodden.
No, I think you bring up a really interesting point. And I would say that we, in the business continuity world of things, we did have pandemic as one of the items that was in there, but there was 4 lines in that. We care about our employees. We'll send people home. They'll come back to work. We'll recover. But no one was in there that's going to be, it's 24 months and travel restrictions and all the different things that went into this to destroy supply chains,
Well,
destroy
10 years,
organizations.
10 years earlier, we had a dry run with the bird flu and stockpiling Tamiflu and dealing with should we have more VPN licenses, right? And I think that it didn't reach the point where people said we have to change the way we do things, but this pandemic has.
Well, so one of the things, well, personally, didn't predict this one. The insurance, like there is pandemic insurance for hotels and things like that existed in the community for years and years for these types of things because of those outbreaks. But I think one of the things is that the urgency of the pandemic, everybody who didn't want to implement MFA and is going to do it next quarter, believe me, I watch them do it in 24 hours while they're under ransomware. Like at 4 times the cost and apparently all the training removed. So, there's ways to do this, but when everybody went remote, one of the things about workarounds, and just to throw an evil thought into the heads of everybody in the audience, one of the things about workarounds is when the crisis is over, everybody forgets to turn them off. And a lot of times that's a vulnerability that persists long past the emergency. But I think flexible, like what we've done for this pandemic, it has really upped the game of the ability to respond to crisis in a virtual environment. We had that, some of us had it before, we've really perfected it now. So I think there's, that opportunity both ways, but is that resilience. It also leaves resilience for, tsunamis, hurricanes, for those who are facing those. I'm so sorry. Good luck today. And the twisters that hit, or tornadoes that hit many states. It does give you the ability to have a more resilient workforce and hopefully more flexible. However, it seems to eat into family time more now than ever.
Yeah,
so,
but it has also introduced certain issues that you never thought about. To Caroline's point, you have the things that are unpredictable. One of the first things we discovered, people don't reboot their computers anymore. People don't lock their computers anymore. We went from 50,000, measuring 50,000 screen locks in an organization on a regular basis, on a daily basis, that went down to 14 in the height of COVID, when everybody was locked down. You're like, okay, everybody's at home and walking away from their computer and no one's locking anything down. And then we discovered, as we're patching things on Patch Tuesday, all of a sudden we're like, why is our metrics so off now? And they're like, oh, 60% of the computers, they had the patches that we delivered last month, but no one rebooted the computer because no one takes their computer home. No one sits down in that. So that human factor, the way we work, has changed, which incorporates other things that you have to think about as part of this resiliency practice, to say, maybe we just reboot the computers for them. And then you go, well, okay, we put the little screen, they still don't click on it. You make the screen bigger. Okay, fine. Your screen is covered. You don't have a choice now but to reboot your computer. But those things you go back to is like, those are going to be those unexpected consequences, and you can't predict those, of the way we changed our behavior on those things that are around that. It used to be, hey, you get a phone call in the middle of the night from work, guaranteed probably 90% of the time people will answer it. I do not think that is the same question, and I have personal experience with trying to rally troops in the middle of the night, that people, their phones are not by their bedside anymore. They're someplace else in the house or anything else that's there. Or they're operating on different time schedules as global organizations. It's like, hey, I'm up at 11 p.m. at night and doing 8 a.m. because I have to do stuff in Asia Pac that's there. So I'm not picking up the phone in those periods of time. So you really have to think about people, how they're working on that. And in equipment, if you ever have to buy equipment now, you're going to end up spending 3 months waiting for it to arrive on your doorstep.
I'm hearing a theme that says, whatever matters to you, you need to think about what you would do if that were not available anymore. What is your backup plan? Not only is your data backed up, but are your people backed up? Are the systems and services that you rely on backed up? I have a super unusual role right now as Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt. I actually oversee security and IT and human resources. I oversee our people function. Super weird and super fun. Turns out security and people have a lot of overlap, mostly because what both organizations are trying to do is we're trying to influence human behavior. And there's something to be said in this resilience conversation about succession planning. Just like Brian was saying, for all the organizations who tried so hard in normal times to implement 2FA, could never get it prioritized, could never get it budgeted and resourced. And then when you need it, when it becomes an emergency, all of a sudden you can do it kind of fast. There's something to be said for saying, do I know what's important? And what's my plan if it fails? And the plan doesn't have to be perfect, but hopefully there's something. Hopefully we are able to identify single points of failure throughout our organizations. I have begun to revisit a couple of books that I love, The Phoenix Project and its successor, the Unicorn Project. And in these books, I don't know if folks are familiar with them, but there's this one person, his name's Brent. And it's kind of like Brent is the engineer. He is the person that everyone can turn to say, what is going on? And one of the reasons this character exists in these books is to say, if you're in a situation where there's one person or one system or one supplier that a lot of other things depend on and there's no backup, that's an opportunity to do something a little bit better.
No, yeah. To back to some of the same thing. Who would have thought toilet paper and aluminum cans was something that we could not have had a supply chain with on that side of it?
Did you hear about this cream cheese thing? My goodness. New York is running out of bagels, apparently.
Yeah, it's Brian's issue. It's resiliency is like, hey, the ransomware guys hit it where it hurts. That Bagel Wednesday is now over with.
The other thing I'll say is, as you think about resilience, and also to mirror that, what happens in a crisis. Two things. Crises happen at the following 2 times in the week. Friday evening between 5 p.m. your local time or 9 p.m. my local time, and a couple hours after that, or Sunday morning of a 3-day weekend, or Sunday midnight to 6 a.m. when you come in Monday, everything's flattened.
Basically, it's the weekend. I'm going to just put that change in, move those things to production. Then I can rest easy this weekend, right?
I have a theory I've never actually asked on a panel before, so I'm curious. And then I'll talk about what I was going to talk about. But my theory is the findings on a Friday night, I bet, are most of our systems and security people trying to clear their desk before the weekend, and they find the stuff they should have found on Tuesday because they don't have the 20 extra percent that Caroline was talking about.
No hunting on Fridays, not allowed. I don't want to work a weekend, okay?
Right, exactly. So I honestly think a lot of times the stuff that's triggered by somebody seeing a log happens on the Fridays. The ransomware strikes on the Sundays, or the Sunday to Monday time. The other thing is, when I do those the pre-work with the boards, and we do reel up tabletops and sometimes executive walkthroughs. We're not putting them in a test. We're walking through what are the roles of outside counsel, ransomware vendor, remediation vendor, and cyber smoke jumpers. Okay, who can sign a contract authorizing $50,000 to $100,000 for the fire department even to show up and figure out what kind of dumpster fire you have? Oh, I can. Great. Sir, do you fly often? Yeah, I have a house in Cabo. Well, sir, who signs it when you're on the plane? Oh, and everybody looks uncomfortably around the boardroom. So it's not just that succession planning in the military. We always plan to take over for the person above us because we assume they get shot. And you had to memorize in the military how many people between you and the president. When I was in the Naval Academy to Plebe, it was 13. Now, horizontally, there's a lot of people in that row, but still, knowing who takes over, maybe not the entire role, but those critical functions. One other question, I'll hand it back to the panel. Who can turn something off? Who can throw the big Frankenstein switch at your company and shut off the internet, close down the financial transaction website because you have lost all trust in that venue? And that will be the shot heard around the world to your clients. And for one other thing for Caroline with the just in time at Toyota, who gets to hit the button and stop the whole production line and why? That is so critical. That and signing contracts on the weekend. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think it's one of the things that, to your point, you need to take action. Security is a lot about doing. You do a lot of planning, but it's also about doing. And having that said of like, do I need to get a CEO? Do I need to get the CIO? Who is the authorized person that can authorize this? And then if they're not available, who goes next on that side of it? And I think that's super important. And I remember a probably the worst time, not from a actual attack or perspective and damage, was getting attacked on Valentine's Day. And on that side of it that's there. And now you're like, at this point in time, I've screwed the day and I am probably going to get shot, not at the office, but when I arrive home at this point in time. Because it's the same thing of like, is there something that I could find that will impact that and do the same thing on that side. And it's the same issue of like, who can I call in the middle of the day and try to get people? And you know what? There is no one is picking up because everyone has the same thing that I have. Do not answer that call right now. If you pick that phone up, you're in trouble on that side of it that's there. And I think those are those key areas that, yes, it's going to happen. If you don't have some level of delegation or some plan in place, you're just going to end up with a lot of places. And the plan needs to be, here's who's authorized, everybody's agreed upon it. Brian, I know you go through this in a lot of boardrooms on planning, is like, you have your plan, you have the idea of whether you're going to pay or not pay kind of scenarios. And there's always someone in the room that goes, what? And we're like, we already decided this. You cannot change. You're not calling an audible right now. Okay. But you need to have that because someone is always going to say, I want to call audible at this point in time. What we discussed before was never like, well, I agreed to it, but at that time, I didn't realize this would ever happen. And I think those are key areas that like plan on it happening, and it will happen. Our whole risk posture with likelihood and blast radius and impact, likelihood is 100%. Okay, we flattened the curve on this. On that side of it, it is going to happen to you one way or another.
Well, and one final thing, and another one to mirror both Richard and John. You heard this story earlier in the week, I think, but several months ago, and it's happened, I think, 3 times in my career so far. Talking to a client on a Thursday night, we're going to do some testing or some advisory or some stuff next week. We get a call at the 1-800 number because they were ransomwared so badly they couldn't find my phone number in their emails to call me, or things like that. Print out your ransomware playbook, please. If you're old school, have a laminated card of everybody's addresses or phone numbers and emails. If you're younger, take a picture of it on your iPhone. Either way, include your lawyer, your insurance provider, and your cyber smoke jumper. And please, God, please have those contracts figured out in advance, because redlining a legal contract on a Friday or Sunday ain't happening. So you
can't negotiate Fridays and Sundays. There's that extra hour.
You can't negotiate the price of water while the fire department is standing there. It just doesn't work this way. Please stop.
I need to set some ground rules here. Don't jinx us. I hear there's a big holiday coming up. But playbooks, practicing. I was at a presentation. It was former Mayor Giuliani years ago speaking in front of a cybersecurity audience in New York, just talking about the 9/11, right? And New York did, and the support services in New York had practiced a lot of things. They hadn't practiced a plane running into a building. They practiced, what if we have ruptured gas lines? What if we have this, fires? What if we have this? It gets very congested in New York City, right? The traffic. So how do we get people out of New York, out of Manhattan, if there's an emergency? And so, but they had all of these playbooks, and they had them printed out. They had the call list. They knew who was in charge of what, and they were able to pull the teams together. Obviously it was a very involved thing, but we don't know the things we don't know, but we can know the things that we know, so that when something does happen, we can be close, or we can have a couple playbooks that help to narrow it down as well.
Now, I think you bring up a good point. There's one thing when we practice things, and I don't take this as tabletops are bad or anything else, but there is a practice that's done. When we were part of Google many years ago, their resiliency was, we're going to unplug a building on the campus from the network. We don't care. Everything is supposed to be redundant and everything else. People need to do this. The same thing comes back. I can test all the time and I won if it's just on a piece of paper and we're following what we would push for switches and everything else. And you ask, well, can you just pull the cable on it? And everybody's scared. We can't do that. I'm like, if you are scared to pull the switch when it actually does burn or break, how are you going to respond to it if you don't know the steps after that? Or many times we've seen it with like emergency notifications, like, yeah, we pushed the button to tell everybody something. It did not work. Those things are going to take place, but how you respond to it. But if you've never practiced it before, you don't know if you flip that switch, everything is disconnected.
Right. I think that and I want Caroline to have a chance to talk too, but a quick point here. We've moved to the cloud. A lot of our companies are really embracing the cloud. And I think that that's also a way to empower our resiliency, even though at the same time there are outages. We've seen them recently even, and I think we can to some extent account for that. And the resiliency maybe of a Google or an Amazon may actually be better than our own data center resiliency. But as we move to the cloud, software and to SaaS, right? Software gets updated. It just gets updated. When you're arguing with the business owner who says, well, I don't know, we can't really patch that. I need an exception for a year because I'm going to have to budget for it. And there's going to be a lot of testing. And it's like, we move to the cloud now. It's like you have to change your cadence because it's going to get patched. And so I think there are some good things that come, I think more good than bad. I don't know if you guys would agree.
I couldn't agree with that more. I am like all cloud all the way. Cobalt happens to be a cloud first organization. I think it's easier in many ways to be born in the cloud than to have transitioned from not cloud to new cloud. There is something I want to observe. I see a theme emerging, and you all will see very quickly. I'm into sort of like categories and buckets. We have talked about, in an emergency scenario, who can sign the contract, who can access the system, who can press the off switch. And I think that there is something to be said about designing a plan, which can be tested with a tabletop exercise, for decision-making, access, and authority. And there's a centralized model and there's a decentralized model. And maybe in a centralized model, maybe a certain kind of centralized model has more single points of failure. And maybe there's a totally different design involved in considering a decentralized model. The cloud is like a perfect example of the decentralized model. If I have a server and it's sitting right here next to me in the garage, and I'm the one who's responsible for making sure it's at the right temperature and it has appropriate power and all that stuff, it's kind of a lot of responsibility for me. But if I outsource that to folks who have resources and skills and stuff, sure, their server is going to go down every once in a while, but that is, just like any other risk management decision that each of us make on a daily basis.
Agreed. One final quick story. I know we're coming up on time. Is one time I was at an organization, doesn't matter where, and somebody goes, "We need you to sign a contract to buy a generator." And I'm on a campus of a major corporation. And I'm like, why am I buying a generator? I'm like, well, in case the power goes out. And I'm looking around, and it's like a pretty, I'm figuring resilient campus. So I use the Socratic Method. I said, well, what color is the gas can? And they're like, what? And I'm like, what color is the gas can? Is it red or purple or blue? They're like, well, probably red. And I'm like, what color is the pager? And it was like, the pager for what? To tell you to go fill the gas can. And he goes, well, I don't know. And I said, I don't think we're buying a generator. So, the resiliency, when you start looking at cloud, and I only met him twice, he won't remember me, but I talked to Satya when I was the chief at Cybercrime Center at Microsoft, and pointed to servers I had there. And I said, should I own this or should I move it to your place? And he goes, oh, you're moving it to my place. And I said, that's not really cheap and easy from the terrestrial to cloud. So that's why he likes the born in the cloud people too, like you over at Cobalt. There's also resiliency there because you can have immutable storage. You can have multiple copies. Now you're going to pay for it, but still. And you can have partly cloudy with a chance of resilience by having multi-cloud. So there's a lot of, I usually say partly cloudy with a chance of security, but I'm trying to be nicer to the cloud vendors. I'll tell you, responding in the cloud's a lot easier than terrestrial, recovery and other things. So I think we're coming up on time, but honored to discuss these topics here in this venue. Thanks for having me. And what a great crew. Thanks for lowering the bar and letting me be the fourth in the golf game.
I think there's a lot that we could talk about, and we'll head over to the speaker Q&A room afterwards for a little bit. But there is a question in the chat, and since we only had one, maybe we have a chance here in the last couple of minutes. It has to do with governance. Can we talk about governance fitting into the systems better and more elegantly?
No, I think that's an active thing, and you see it now with a lot of the standards coming out on that side of it. That's there, that you have frameworks that are around resiliency. You have different ideas on that side of it. Even in some of the certifications, you did the hard stuff. Like part of ISO or NIST or any of the other stuff. Do you have playbooks? Have you made disaster business continuity plans? Those are requirements in those frameworks that are there. So the governance model does work with that says, okay, you can't get away with not doing this. Now, how well those plans are laid out, what those look like, that's all on the people in the process on that side of it. It could be written down on a napkin and photographed, but there's something there. But how diligent that is and who was the last time it is. We always used to laugh at the policy book, which was the 3-inch notebook that when you picked it up off the table, you had to blow the dust off of it because no one looked at it. That's the danger in some of the areas on some of these. But at least now in a governance model and a traditional compliance model, you at least look at it once a year and at least at a minimum. So you're not like, oh, we're dusting this off. Yeah, we need to reboot the mainframe. Do we still have one of those?
All right. Any last comments from Brian or Caroline?
One on governance is for those of you that the NIST, the frameworks that were not materially connected to the business model or to the information architecture or security architecture. If you're anywhere near CMMC or production of artifacts that go into government supply chains, the audits, the controls are technically now integrated. So you are seeing on the financial and government classified or near classified or supply chain oriented things, you're seeing the actual marrying of them. What I think is the next generation is security used to be perimeter. Now it's identity. Soon it'll be business process. You will need to secure a process that the business itself doesn't truly understand, because each transaction, even with an authentic identity, shouldn't occur because it's a taken over identity. And you can't figure that out technically. You have to figure it out on the business layer. So that, if you're a little younger, start studying business re-engineering and business understanding. That's my thoughts about governance. And there are a bunch of great innovative companies, I won't mention them to be fair, integrating the GRC into the day-to-day. And that's, if they're unconnected, it's credenzaware. We all know it. That's my thoughts on that. Again, opinions of my own, not necessarily my employer. Have to get that in.
I couldn't agree more with Brian that it's about business process. The hardest problems that we have to solve are not technology problems. They are process problems.
All right.
8, 9, and 10 of the OSI model for you techies are politics, religion, and funding. Start studying those. That's where I spend most of my career.
All right. Brian has you'll have his Twitter handle, and he'll have dad jokes and lots of sayings and advice on his Twitter. So thank you all.